You know what I'm talking about? This article at The Atlantic that was published online this morning, actually last night, I think, by Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief. And boy, haven't the cockroaches who cluster around the toilet rat, haven't they tried to demean Jeffrey Goldberg, who has more integrity and talent in his goddamn little finger than these fuckers all put together as a group will ever come close to. But as usual, the effort to demean the messenger who is bringing absolute fucking truth because he's got the recording. Ow! Oh, how awful. All right, back to what Jeffrey Goldberg has published at The Atlantic online. After receiving the Waltz text related to the Houthi PC small group, I consulted a number of colleagues. We discussed the possibility that these texts sent to me were part of a disinformation campaign initiated by either a foreign intelligence service or, more likely, a media gadfly organization, the sort of group that attempts to place journalists in embarrassing positions and sometimes succeeds. I had very strong doubts that this text group was real because I could not believe that the national security leadership of the United States would communicate on signal about imminent war plans. I also could not believe that the national security advisor to the president, that would be Michael Waltz, would be so reckless as to include the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic in such discussions with senior U.S. officials up to and including the vice president. The next day, things got even stranger. At 8:05 in the morning on Friday, March 14th, Michael Waltz texted the group, quote, "Team, you should have a statement of conclusions with taskings per the president's guidance this morning in your high side inboxes," end quote. High side is government parlance, refers to classified computer and communications systems. The text went on, quote, "State and DOD, we developed suggested notification lists for regional allies and partners. Joint staff is sending this morning a more specific sequence of events in the coming days, and we will work with DOD to ensure COS, OVP, and President of the United States are briefed," end quote. Now, OVP is Office of Vice President, COS, I'm not sure. Anyway, Goldberg goes on. At this point, a fascinating policy discussion commenced. The account labeled J.D. Vance responded at 8:16 a.m. Quote, "Team, I am out for the day doing an economic event in Michigan, but I think we are making a mistake," end quote. Vance was indeed in Michigan that day. The Vance account goes on to say this, quote, 3% of U.S. trade runs through the Suez. 40% of European trade does. There is a real risk that the public doesn't understand this or why it's necessary. The strongest reason to do this, as the president said, is to send a message, end quote. The Vance account then goes on to make a noteworthy statement, considering that the vice president has not deviated publicly from Trump's position on virtually any issue. He says, quote, "I am not sure the president is aware how inconsistent this is with his message on Europe right now. There's a further risk that we see a moderate to severe spike in oil prices. I'm willing to support the consensus of the team and keep these concerns to myself. But there is a strong argument for delaying this a month, doing the messaging work on why this matters, seeing where the economy is, etc." End quote. And then a person identified in Signal as Joe Kent, that's Trump's nominee to run the National Counterterrorism Center. His name is Joe Kent, Joe Kent in the Signal group wrote at 8:22, quote, "There's nothing time-sensitive driving the timeline. We'll have the exact options in a month," end quote. Then at 8:26 a.m., a message landed in my Signal app from the user John Ratcliffe. The message contained information that might be interpreted as related to actual and current intelligence operations. At 8:27, a message arrived from the Pete Hegseth account. Quote, "VP, I understand your concerns and fully support you raising with the president. Important considerations, most of which are tough to know how they play out, for example, economy, Ukraine, peace, Gaza, etc. I think messaging is going to be tough no matter what. Nobody knows who the Houthis are, which is why we would need to stay focused on 1, Biden failed, and 2, Iran funded," end quote. This Hegseth message goes on to state, quote, "Waiting a few weeks or a month does not fundamentally change the calculus. 2, immediate risks on waiting. First, this leaks and we look indecisive. Second, Israel takes an action first on Gaza, ceasefire falls apart, and we don't get to start this on our own terms. We can manage both. We're prepared to execute. And if I had final go or no-go vote, I believe we should. This is not about the Houthis. I see it as 2 things. 1, restoring freedom of navigation, a core national interest, and 2, reestablish deterrence, which Biden cratered. But we can easily pause, and if we do, I will do all we can to enforce 100% operational security. I welcome other thoughts," end quote. A few minutes later, Jeffrey Goldberg writes, the Michael Waltz account posted a lengthy note about trade figures and the limited capabilities of European navies. Quote, "Whether it's now or several weeks from now, it will happen. It will have to be the United States that reopens these shipment lanes. Per the President's request, we are working with DOD and state to determine how to compile the cost associated and levy them on the Europeans," end quote. The account identified as J.D. Vance addressed a message at 8:45 to Pete Hegseth. Quote, "If you think we should do it, let's go. I just hate bailing Europe out again," end quote. And then Jeffrey adds, the administration has argued that America's European allies benefit economically from the U.S. Navy's protection of international shipping lanes. Then Jeffrey goes on. The user identified as Hegseth responded 3 minutes later, VP, "I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic. But Mike is correct. We are the only ones on the planet, on our side of the ledger, who can do this. Nobody even comes close. Question is timing. I feel like now is as good a time as any, given the president's directive to reopen shipping lanes. I think we should go. But president still retains 24 hours of decision space," end quote. At this point, the previously silent SM, which, let me separate from all of this, is obviously Stephen Miller, that little Nazi Jew. At this point, the previously silent SM joined the conversation. Quote, "As I heard it, the president was clear, green light, and we soon make clear to Egypt and Europe what we expect in return. We also need to figure out how to enforce such a requirement. E.g., if Europe doesn't remunerate, then what? If the U.S. successfully restores freedom of navigation at great cost, there needs to be some further economic gain extracted in return," end quote. Now let me digress again from what Jeffrey Goldstein wrote. this whole fucking administration has been told to us over and over again, is strictly transactional. It may sound like Trump is trying to do a solid by saying, well, we're going to open the shipping lanes for international shipping. Bullshit. If he were to do that, the only reason to do it in this twisted mind of this toilet rat is to see what he can get financially. And Stephen Miller is making it clear when he uses the term remuneration. We need to find out what we can get back. If Europe doesn't remunerate, he says in the chat, then what? These pigs. Back to Jeffrey. That message from SM, presumably Trump's confidant, Stephen Miller, the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, or someone playing Stephen Miller, that message effectively shut down the conversation. The last text of the day came from Pete Hegseth, who wrote at 9:46 a.m., quote, agree, end quote. After reading this chain, I recognized that this conversation possessed a high degree of verisimilitude. The texts, in their word choice and arguments, sounded as if they were written by the people who purportedly sent them, or by a particularly adept AI text generator. I was still concerned that this could be a disinformation operation or a simulation of some sort. And I remained mystified that no one in the group seemed to have noticed my presence. But if it was a hoax, the quality of mimicry and the level of foreign policy insight were impressive. It was the next morning, Saturday, March 15th, when the story became truly bizarre. At 11:44 a.m., the account labeled Pete Hegseth posted in Signal a, quote, team update, end quote. I will not quote from this update or from certain other subsequent texts. The information contained in them, if they had been read by an adversary of the United States, could have been used to harm American military and intelligence personnel, particularly in the broader Middle East, Central Command's area of responsibility. What I will say, in order to illustrate the shocking recklessness of this signal conversation, is that the Hegseth post contained operational details of forthcoming strikes on Yemen, including information about targets, weapons the U.S. would be deploying, and the attack sequencing. The only person to reply to the update from Hegseth was the person identified as the vice president. Vance wrote, quote, I will say a prayer for victory, end quote. Two other users subsequently added a prayer emoji. According to the lengthy Hegseth text that Goldstein is not quoting, the first detonations in Yemen would be felt 2 hours hence at 1:45 p.m. Eastern Time. So I waited in my car in a supermarket parking lot. If this signal chat was real, I reasoned, Houthi targets would soon be bombed. At about 1:45, I checked X and searched Yemen. Explosions were then being heard across Sana'a, the capital city. I went back to the signal channel. At 1:48, Michael Waltz had provided the group an update. Again, I won't quote from this text, except to note that he described the operation as, quote, an amazing job, end quote. A few minutes later, John Ratcliffe wrote, a good start. Not long after, Waltz responded with 3 emojis, a fist, an American flag, and fire. Others soon joined, including M.A.R., Marco Rubio, who wrote, quote, good job, Pete, and your team, end quote, and Susie Wiles, who texted, quote, Kudos to all, most particularly those in theater and CENTCOM. Really great. God bless. End quote. Steve Witkoff responded with 5 emojis, 2 hands praying, a fixed bicep, and 2 American flags. T.G., Tulsi Gabbard, responded, quote, great work and effects, end quote. The after-action discussion included assessments of damage done, including the likely death of a specific individual. The Houthi-run Yemeni Health Ministry reported that at least 53 people were killed in the strikes, a number that has not been independently verified. The plans, the sequencing, the operational aspects of an attack by the United States military on a foreign country, an attack designed to bomb, kill, destroy, and that gets out before the attack occurs, and this orange sewer rat says, well, the glitch turned out not to be a serious one. I wouldn't like to ask Trump anything because I would go berserk in his presence and wind up in Leavenworth for the rest of my life. But I wish somebody would ask him what in the actual fuck does he consider to be a serious glitch where it concerns U.S. national security. There would be no answer. You know what Trump would answer? The toilet rat would say, well, whatever it would be a lot better or worse, or I don't know, pick a word, than that goddamn Joe Biden. Biden was so terrible. You know, he weaponized the Jesus Christ. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.